the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, and welcome to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. So today, in recognition of April being Parkinson's month, I have invited on the podcast with me today a friend of mine that was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Her name is Dawn. How are you doing, Dawn?
Hey, Brian.
So, Dawn, you were diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then I know later on you also had a stroke on top of that. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast just to spread awareness about Parkinson's and what it's like living with the disease. Can you kind of like take us through your journey with your diagnosis? Like what was happening, what kind of symptoms you were going through that kind of gave you a red flag that something was going on with your health and that made you go see a doctor?
Well, I was diagnosed in 2011. It was the year I was graduating from college with my Bachelor's of Science degree. And I started experiencing symptoms. And actually, I didn't even notice my symptoms. My best friend is actually the one who noticed it first, that something was going wrong with me. Because I was so busy with college that I just, all that was on my mind is getting my capstone class done and graduating. That's all I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
So she acknowledged my symptoms first. She'd had some nursing classes, so she was familiar with some symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
but she didn't tell me what she thought I had. She said, "Hey, Dawn, I think you need to go see a doctor." But I dismissed those, her concerns. And then what really brought it for me to seek the diagnosis or find out what's going on was I fell. I was going into my office one day and I tripped over a curb. I'm like, and I had been tripping a little bit. I hadn't really fallen or anything, but that was the first time I had fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And even then I was like, I went to the doctor and, I got to have a shoe put on my foot until it healed. But then my toes started curling up and covering in, and so it made it difficult to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And then my friend says, "Dawn, you're having more symptoms. Your speech is slurring. Your finger, your pinky fingers starting to shake and tremor a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then your facial expressions are you starting to I'm not smiling as much as she thought I should, when she makes jokes and stuff."
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, maybe there's nerve damage from that fall. And that's when I went to my primary care at the time. And he's also a family friend of ours, of my husband's and I. So we went to see him, and that's when he said, "Dawn, you're going to have a nerve damage. You've got Parkinson's."
Wow. So I don't have a lot of knowledge about Parkinson's. Were part of your symptoms the shaking part? Like, were your hands like real shaky and like that was it like tremors that like came and went, or were they consistent?
Apparently it was consistent, but it was so slight that it was really not noticeable. I mean, it wasn't like, as I progressed, the tremoring was more significant. But right in the beginning where my best friend noticed it, it was just really slight tremor. I mean, it's just the pinky finger, kind of like what Michael J. Fox, one of his first symptoms was, with a little, pinky. And it was just a really slight tremor, just something that you would just notice, but it didn't cause it didn't cause me to shake enough where, I didn't have no issues holding a cup or anything like that. It was just really minor, slight tremor.
Yeah. So, do you have Parkinson's in your family history? Because I know that like a lot of people that have get diagnosed with MS, they have a history of it. I personally did not, but I was just curious as if you had a family history of Parkinson's.
At the time of my diagnosis, there was absolutely nobody. And then within, let's see, I'm trying to think, about almost 4 years into my diagnosis, apparently I had a family member that was diagnosed and he did share with that info. I think he wanted to keep it private for a while. And then, I was put on Facebook one day and it's like, the medication, because at this time my doctor was going to put me on my neurologist that I still went to see for my second opinion, put me on Parkinson's medication to see if it would help,
Hmm.
my symptoms, because I wasn't really ready to take medication at the time. I just go, okay, I'll give it a shot. Was making me extremely, extremely sick. I mean, it was to the point that I was having to do these pills. I mean, it was like, I mean, like I was still feeling better. I felt worse.
Okay.
So I put on Facebook, because my family member who's also on Facebook. I just said, hey, this is just horrible. I can't do this. Well, that's when he reached out to me and he goes, Dawn, this is my uncle. He says, I'm just diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And apparently he was taking some of it as well. And he says, Dawn, he goes, it was like this for 3 months. I took the medicine for 3 months. I was extremely sick. He said to stick with it for 3 months and it'll get better. So I listened to him and that's when I went back and started back on it and again. And then it did, the symptoms did improve as far as the dizziness and the nausea and that kind of stuff got improved.
Okay. Okay. So my next question is, I know that when I got diagnosed with MS, I was 27 years old. A very big hit on my mental health. I, what were the kind of thoughts that were going through your head when you heard those words? You got Parkinson's, and I don't know how much knowledge you had of the disease when you got diagnosed, but I mean, how was the mental health part of the diagnosis? How did you handle that?
Well, ironically, it was disbelief. I think when you get diagnosed with a chronic disease, you go through all kinds of emotions. Sometimes you go through those emotions all at once. Sometimes, like me, it takes years to experience those different emotions. I think part of it has to be, see, like in my situation, my symptoms weren't that bad. Like I said, they were so minor that it didn't affect my work. It didn't affect anything. I was still, jogging and running, 3 miles a day. So, I mean, it didn't affect me at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't until, in fact, I didn't even do any research. I was terrified to death to go to any sport groups. I didn't do any research.
Yeah.
I was terrified. I mean, I was like, because it's like, if I did the research, it made me feel like if I did the research, it made it real.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to face it. So it wasn't until 5 years into it where my symptoms got to the point progressively worse that I said, okay, there's no denying it anymore. I have to do my research and I have to do something at this point.
Wow. Okay. And I can totally relate to that, Dawn, because I'm 27 years with this disease, and I didn't actually reach out for the mental health part of it until I was 15 years into it, because my symptoms were minor. I was still going, but I honestly think that I was still in depression, but I was just kind of fighting it and ignoring it. And I didn't start to reach out for the help until my disease progressed too. And I started having mobility issues, but I totally get that early in a diagnosis of a chronic disease, you still are relatively normal. And you kind of just push through. I totally get that. So when you started to digress, I know that you also had a stroke, and I can't even imagine that. You're already battling the Parkinson's part of it, and then you end up having a stroke. Can you kind of take us through that too?
Well, in 2022, I did have a stroke. I went to the emergency department actually 5 times because I kept getting worse. I went in to the ER with the heartburn, chest pains, and it snowballed from there. They ran tests. They didn't see anything wrong with my heart. So he just missed me with heartburn and And of course, then I get more symptoms get that. That didn't work. And the medicine for heartburn didn't work. And then then more and more symptoms came up. Well, like by the time I got to the third time of ER, they were just dismissing my symptoms as being Parkinson's related. They thought, well, I progressed from the disease, and and the neurologist on call, he said, you need to talk to your neurologist and have him prescribe more Medicine. So, and as you know, trying to get into a neurologist
Yeah.
quickly is not, it just doesn't happen. Sometimes it takes 6 months or a year to get in.
Right.
So unless there's, an emergency, and at this time I was like, okay, I'm just going to call the appointment, schedule an appointment to do this and see if I get as soon as possible. And I could get in as nurse practitioner, but it wasn't right away, even with the nurse practitioner, that he had. So this time I was like, okay, it's so bad. The pain was so severe. I had such a severe headache. I can't describe the headache I had. It was the worst headache I've ever had in my life. And I was working that day, and all of a sudden I lost my vision. I was on the phone with a client and totally lost my vision. I completely lost my speech. I couldn't hang up the phone. I couldn't communicate with the guy on the phone and say, "Hey, please help me." I was lost. I was like, I couldn't. So it's like since my eyesight was so far off, I couldn't hang up. So I'm like, at this point, I knew my mind was still there. So I'm like, something's wrong. I need help. So how am I going to get help? Because clearly I can't talk to the person on the phone. So at this point, I knew. Luckily for me, I was still trying to. I knew it had enough sense to me that I need to contact my daughter or my husband. I was like, something I try to get to, and I was able to select the button for the text to try to text because I knew I couldn't talk.
All right.
And but when I was trying to text the wording, like the sentence didn't make sense. It's like it was all jarbled.
Yeah.
It wasn't commuting. So, of course, at that time, I was like, I gave it a few minutes. I was like, okay, I've got to call 911 at this point. So I called 911, and I don't know how I did it. I called 911. Somehow, I don't know, God was looking over me or something. And I called 911, but I couldn't speak to the 911 operator. But luckily for me, I was signed up for Smart 911 in our area. Well, Smart 911 has my phone number, my contact information, but that I had Parkinson's, but like all that stuff, and my address.
Yeah.
So they were able to my phone to find out where I lived to come to pick me up by ambulance.
Oh
so that said that I would, and of course they didn't. You think my story would end there? But when I went to the ER, there was a train wreck that was happening at the same time, and they were expecting a lot of people to come to the hospital at that time. We had two hospitals, but luckily they had those at a different facility. Most patients went to the other ERs to this one, but they were in such a hurry to get me out. They pretty much dismissed my symptoms. Again, Parkinson's related.
Oh my God.
So yeah, and then of course I continued. When they dismissed me, I got worse again. So again, the fifth trip, I think so. This is now the fifth trip to the ER. It's like, look, this is not right. And then it still didn't get any better. But so it was later on, I had to get another MRI done, and they found the stroke afterwards. And so I did get treated for the stroke, within a 4-hour time frame that I should have in order to get the blood clot broken up.
Wow, that's just so unbelievable, Dawn. I can't believe, so this thing took away your sight, your speech, and you're basically a lot of your physical abilities to move around. How long did it take to get you to where you're at now? Because your speech is so. I understand. I can tell that you've had a stroke just by the way you talk. But you came back. So tell me about your rehab and what you went through on your rehab.
Well, I had to see both physical and speech therapist and occupational. I had all three because because cognitively I had issues. Like grammar words. Like I knew what words I needed to say, but I couldn't figure out what those words were.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had memory issues. I couldn't remember people's names, including my family's names. But as the, with the speech therapy, that helped with the cognitive part of it. It took over a year of therapy for me to get, not want to say I've never, even now, I'm not even 100%. I'm more like I can say because, percentage is probably 88%. I think last time I tested with him, I think I was at 80, 85 or 88, something like percent. But it took about a year of therapy. I did regain just slowly, like the more time passed, in his days passed, I was able to, of course, within two to 3 days of the stroke, I can remember family members' names. I still had trouble. They weren't close family. I still had trouble with them, but the pets I had, and, my husband and daughter, my parents, sisters, I can remember within a few days, I can get those member names back.
Mm-hmm.
But names on songs or names, like his friends, I mean, except for my closest one, it took a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But the biggest hurdle I had was the getting worse, and that's one reason why they kind of dismissed my symptoms with Parkinson's. Because with Parkinson's disease, you have brain fog, you have memory issues, cognitive problems where you have trouble remembering names and songs, like the words of songs and stuff like that. But this was different. This was with using Parkinson's. You have issues, Dave. Like if you're like really tired, if you're fatigued one day, you have cognitive brain fog, or you have. It's not so quick like that. Usually, this was so immediate. When I had a stroke, it was immediate. I mean, I was fine. I mean, I went from being 100% to being like, damn, I couldn't remember anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why there's a difference. Even my new neurologist that I went to see, she says, how do they not know you didn't have a stroke? That's not how Parkinson's works. You slowly lose your speech, or you slow your speech. You don't immediately completely lose your speech. I mean, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You said that you're married. So I know that chronic diseases, they destroy marriages. A lot of divorces happen after a chronic disease diagnosis. How did your husband handle the diagnosis of Parkinson's, and then when you had the stroke? Because that's a tough road for the spouse too. Having somebody that has Parkinson's and has a stroke or has MS or whatever. I mean, that's a battle in itself for the spouse. Talk to me about how your spouse handled the diagnosis of Parkinson's and the stroke.
Well, actually, the stroke didn't. Before our stroke, I want to mention that it wasn't my husband that had an issue. Well, you would think it would have been my husband that would have an issue with me having my diagnosis. I think he was in denial, just like my family, because my family they were having trouble accepting my diagnosis at the beginning. They kept wanting to say, "Well, I think you need a second or third opinion." They didn't want to believe that I had the disease because I looked fine to them.
Right.
So at this point, I wasn't really showing symptoms as much, so they were in denial. So the problem was more with me because the guilt of knowing that my family were going to have to take care of me. That was horrible. That's where my depression came in, was about the guilt.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I go through the same thing, Dawn. With MS, I always, I went through a 2-year stretch in 2015 that I actually had thoughts of just saying, you know what, you'd be better off dead because you're a burden on everybody. You can't even, somebody's going to have to take care of yourself. I mean, that's a tough thing mentally. For the person that's going through the chronic disease. So I totally understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I've got a story to tell you about this. This is something that really happened to me. I was really, like I told you, within 5 years of my diagnosis, I told you I was really, really depressed. And because I had fallen again. That's something I did mention. I had fallen, and I was really starting to walk, and I couldn't run anymore. I was starting to gain weight because I couldn't run anymore.
Right.
Running and jogging is I love to do. I mean, it was one of my favorite things to do. It was my way of coping with the disease, because when you're running and jogging, you're focused on that running, and that's all. I just love doing it. So when I lost that ability, and this time my dog, I had my emotional support dog. She was almost 18 at the time, and she was also sick. She was what the doctor required me to to keep me walking because
Yeah.
when I couldn't walk, she couldn't walk, I carried her. When I couldn't walk, she forced me to go.
Gotcha.
So she passed away.
Hmm.
So I completely lost.
Yeah.
And excuse me.
Yeah. No, you're fine, Dawn. You're fine. You're fine.
I,
Yeah, I understand.
I to tell you the story, which was kind of important to me, but caused me to get better was one day I said, I said, this is I had a pitycardia. Okay. I need to go to the place where my dogs, where me and my dog, we walked. We went to this park. There was nobody in the park at the time. So I sat down on the bench and I prayed to God. I said, you're going to have to help me because I need help.
Yeah.
I said, at this point, I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I had already suffered childhood trauma in my life. I had several illnesses, and then this is Parkinson's, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I said, God, you're going to have to give me a sign, or I can't do this anymore. Well, I sat there for, I bet the show was probably 30 minutes in this park. And I was like, I screamed at the top lines, you're going to have to give me a sign. But nothing came. And I'm like, I don't know. I was like, I knew in my head, it's like, God doesn't talk to people. He's not going to listen. I didn't hear no voices or nothing like that. But when I got out of my car, when I was leaving the park, I got into my car. And the very first thing, the first radio comes on, it's the first thing, when you're not, your radio's always on when you get in the car. But before I'd even put the car in to go, the song came on that I've never heard before. I've never, ever heard it. And it was from Medusa, and the name of the song was Overcomer. And the very first claim out there of that on the radio said, "You're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under because God is holding you right now." That's it. That's my sign.
I love it. I love it. And that's what we do. We take any kind of a sign that we can get to keep on fighting whatever disease we have. I can totally relate to that, Dawn, and that's where I really have so much inspiration when I watch your videos, just because you just look like, sound like I'm never going to quit. I'm never going to quit. I'm never going to quit fighting. It doesn't matter what life throws at me. I got God in my corner, and I'm going to fight on and continue to live my life the best I can. And I love that about you.
Well, I know a lot of people, not everybody has a faith or has a religion, but to me, it was the one thing that got me through it because when you have traumas and you've got chronic illnesses, you need to have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And if you don't have, you had not only do you need, in my opinion, you need faith, but you also need a good support system. And when you're sick, as you know, you feel the guilt that comes along with those chronic illnesses. You want to push, your instinct is to push people away. So you need to have a good support system to say, hey, I don't care how much you're going to push me away. I'm still going to be here. And that's what, and a lot of people, unfortunately, not everybody has that, which is why I think with my videos, I'm trying to emphasize how important it is. And that's why I've got a blog that I've started, and I'm going to try to do more to try to, and I've also got a book that I'm co-authoring with somebody, with a couple of attorneys, and it talks about personal relationships and that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to get people to understand how important, and these aspects of your product illness is.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm with you, Dawn. It's just in my 27 years of dealing with multiple sclerosis, I just think that in the public in general just don't understand chronic diseases, whether it's Parkinson's, fibromyalgia, migraine headaches. A lot of times you can't see the disease. Like early in your Parkinson's, people didn't know you had Parkinson's. Probably a lot of people didn't know I had MS. And we just keep on fighting and keep on plugging along, and we try to figure stuff out. And we just want people to understand that, understand that it just for us to get up and get out of bed is a struggle sometimes. And just understand that we're doing the best we can, and don't stereotype us and put us into classes and, treat us any differently. I think that's what we're both trying to get. It's just people to understand.
I mentioned you before, my mother-in-law had MS, and of course I got a father all this with MS. But she, the whole time, even though I helped her, like when I was younger, before I was 40, I was diagnosed at 40. But prior to my diagnosis, I helped her with her MS fundraisers. And never in my life did I think later on in my life that I would end up with something similar, because MS and Parkinson's, the symptoms are quite similar. And even she passed away a few years ago. And, even though I was sick, she always asked about me. She never wanted to talk about herself. And she never wanted me to know how severe her symptoms were.
Yeah.
And even to this day, I don't understand it, because I wish she had been there. I wish I could have been more, but she wouldn't let me in. But some people handle their diseases differently. Some people are open with their diseases. Some people want to just keep it to themselves. Everybody's different.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just to kind of give you my own explanation, 27 years with MS, and probably 26 out of those 27 years, I didn't want to talk about it. I shut everybody out. Not everybody, but I shut everything out. I wasn't on any social media. I didn't know what TikTok was. I didn't know what Facebook was. I wanted to avoid all that. I didn't want to talk about MS. And then about a year ago is when I just, I said, you know what? I think people just need to start hearing this, because people just don't understand. I spent 27 years with this disease, and that is my biggest complaint about it. It's not having a disease. It's actually that people around me don't understand. But I think that's partly my fault, because, I kept my mouth shut for 26 years. And I know there's a lot of people like that. And that's and that's my whole purpose of this podcast now, is just to spread awareness, because I think people need to understand MS and Parkinson's and any other chronic disease, that what it's like living with it.
Well, another thing I like to mention, I think it's important for people and me and people like you who tell more and more people, because honestly, that's how I've noticed more and more people that are having symptoms, but they didn't know they were, until somebody else, like they know somebody with MS or Parkinson's or strokes, or until they or cancer. Some people are just like, wait a minute, there is something wrong with me, and then they're going to the doctors and trying to find out what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
But because I don't think, without us talking about it, I don't think a lot of these people probably would have been diagnosed as quick as they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I hear, and I hear just some of the battles that people have getting diagnosed with MS. I mean, they know that they have something wrong, and they're telling doctors, and doctors are spinning it off on something else, like stress, or it's in their head, it's mental health. And it takes 2-3 years to get diagnosed, and that's a strain on your mental health just in that, just having doctors telling you, no, it's nothing. And that's another thing that I want to try to help people with is, advocate for yourself. Your body. When something's not right. If you got a doctor telling you that, oh no, it's all in your head, and it's not just all in your head, it's something with your body, you gotta find another doctor that's willing to listen to you, because the one that you're telling, okay, just check them off the list and go find somebody that will listen.
That's important to mention too. When I went to the ER when I had the stroke, even the ambulance drivers, people that came picking me up, said that they believe I was having a stroke. When I went to the ER, the very last time that I went, because I switched hospitals and doctors after that. But the very last time I went in and complained again, they were completely dismissive to me. They were talking over my head, because I couldn't communicate still.
Right.
So they were talking to my family, and of course my family they asked my family, has she committed suicide in the past? And of course I'm trying to say, wait a minute, what does this have to do with my symptoms? What does it matter if I was committed suicide 20 years ago or 10 years ago? Or whatever the case may be. It's like I published a book. I just got my permission from the government to open my 501c charity. I was happy. I was getting on vacation. What does my mental health from the past have anything to do with my current symptoms? And I couldn't talk and communicate. So they were talking about it. Well, then I got upset. So then, of course, I was like, and I needed to get somebody's attention. Well, that's when they decided to send me to a mental hospital for 48-hour, 72-hour, what they call evaluation. So, of course, that's again, that just like took away more time of the treatment for that stroke because they were not recognizing my symptoms. They were too focused on those mental health. And it's so sad that it took 5 trips and to finally get the answers that there really was a stroke.
Yeah, yeah, and it is sad. It's sad that we have to do that. We got to fight for our health, and it's sad that some people have to do that, and sometimes it just depends on what area of the world you live in. There's better health care in certain areas, but it's just sad that it's not consistent everywhere, all over the place. Us as warriors, we still fight on. And that's what I love about you, Dawn. I mean, all this stuff that you've been through, you just always seem so positive, and you're, even though there's been negatives in your life, and that's what I really love about watching your videos, is that you're just positive, and you just like to tell people, you know what, you got this. You can do this. Look at me. I'm doing it, so you can do it too. And I love that about you.
You can overcome anything. If you can go through the things I went through and come out fighting, I mean, nobody should ever give up. And I hate to think that somebody they feel like it kind of angers me that people think somebody can't stand, like, because people listen to you. I think sometimes I feel like how many people have lost their lives because of somebody not listening to them.
Yeah.
And everybody always talks about how people say, "Oh, I'll be there." People on Facebook and their social media like, "I'll be there." All you need to do is reach out. But when you do reach out and you say stuff, people don't. It's like if you talk about it too much, people kind of start avoiding you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's said that's why I'm hoping. I'm talking to my old neurologist, the one that I just switched. So I'm going to see what I can do. I can't help other hospitals and clinics, and I can't help all these other people that are so I'm trying to see if I could find somebody in my own area that I can educate emergency room places and say, hey, maybe go and speak to them and say, look, even if somebody has a mental health issue, there could be really something wrong with them that's not mental health. But when you don't listen to them and you dismiss them as being mental ill, you're not listening. To me, everybody who walks into that ER, they should be treated like they've never seen it before. That they're looking at the symptoms, not their history. History is important to rule out things, right? But you should always focus on the current symptoms, not always with the history. The history is just a helpful tool.
Yeah.
But so many ER doctors don't. They're just too focused on, oh, this is a drug pusher. This is this is somebody who's just like chronic complainer. They don't listen.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hoping someday that I can change.
Yeah. Amen. I hope you can too. I hope I can too. I mean, I'm doing this. I think that neurologists or any doctor, I mean, they're all so smart. I mean, I give them all the credit in the world for all the education they have, but a lot of times they don't have that, I guess, bedside manner that they listen to their patients. They're smart as heck, but they just don't. They don't listen. And that's frustrating for us as patients too. I know I've been through it with neurologists with my MS. My wife's been through it with doctors, with trying to get stuff figured out. And I think that's a lot of the frustration that we have as patients, is that a lot of times we just feel that doctors don't listen to us sometimes. And I hope that does change. I really do. I hope it changes. And if you got a doctor that's not listening to you, you got to advocate for yourself. And I mean, I won't hesitate now to argue with the doctor. You know what? I respect your intelligence, but no, you're wrong. I know my body better than you do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to trust when you're going to see a hospital or a doctor, you have to be able to trust that doctor.
Yeah.
And if you can't, you need to find another doctor that you can trust.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Dawn, I really appreciate you coming on today, and helping spread awareness about Parkinson's. I always tell everybody every time I talk to somebody, whether they have MS or another chronic disease, I learn. I've had MS for 27 years. I talked to somebody with MS that's only had it for 3 and hear their story, and I learn because everybody's different. And I did an episode with a guy that has Parkinson's, shaky, a while back. And now talking to you, I learned something new from you. And, I learned something from Shaky. I learned something from you. And that's what I think people need to do is just listen to us, because that's the only way you're going to learn. You can read all you want. You can get all the book education you want, but learn from other people's experiences and listen to them.
Exactly. I agree. And I wish more and more people would speak up. I really think the more we advocate for ourselves and bring more and more of this out in the open, and people are more and more comfortable, I think it'll help mental health. I think it'll really improve.
Yeah.
I think too many people are ashamed or scared or don't want people to believe them. There's so many things that have. I think the more and more like that, things will change if we could just keep advocating for him. And some people are not able to. Don't like for me. Even for me, I don't like sometimes speaking out in front of people because of my speech problems.
Yeah.
So it makes me a little nervous. And maybe people are like me; they're just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But maybe I think it's important. The reason why I do this, even though my speech issues, I want people to like, hey, you don't have to be a public speaker. You don't have to be that perfect voice.
Mm-hmm.
People want to see the flaws. I don't want somebody who's a public speaker because they won't believe that you've got a disease if you're perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I know a guy over in the UK that has MS, primary progressive, and he lost his ability to speak. MS took it. But he still expresses himself in other ways. He communicates through a computer app, and he uses a lot of songs to just communicate with people. And that's the part that I love about people that have chronic diseases is that they, even though that their chronic disease took something from them, they figure it out. And there's always an answer. You might not be able to do something as good as you used to be able to do it, but you can still figure it out to keep on doing what you love to do.
Yeah, some people do it through art. Some people do it through, I've seen all kinds of, that's one thing about TikTok I really love. I've come to grow, I think out of all the social media, I love TikTok the most because it just shows the different, different variety of how people have handled their diseases. Like I said, through art, through music, through public speaking. I mean, there's so many different ways. Some people write books, some people write poetry. It just amazes me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are not done because you got diagnosed. You just got to figure it out and figure out what you can still do that you enjoy doing, that you can still be productive, and that's why I like talking to you, Dawn, because you are a warrior. You are somebody that just, you're not willing to give up, you get diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then you accept that, and you're kicking its ass, and then all of a sudden you get hit with a stroke, and you still are just are so positive, and that's why that's what people need to see. They need to see you can't quit. You got to stay positive. You need support, and you just got to keep on pushing on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dawn, I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to start wrapping this up. Again, this is April, and it's Parkinson's month. Please do some research on it. Learn about the disease, so that you understand it a little bit better. And I want to thank Dawn for coming on and helping me to explain Parkinson's a little better, teach me something. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram, MS Michigan Man 64. You can find me on TikTok, MS Michigan 64, and you can also find me on Facebook, Brian Wallace out of Brunswick, Ohio. Until the next episode, this is Brian. I am out.